Much, Mark, and good afternoon to all of you. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules, more importantly, your lunchtime to join this webinar. I do appreciate that all of you are at different levels of your implementation or not of S&OP, and you may well have some of what we're going to talk about in place and working well for you, but just not named as S&OP. But look, it's a very broad topic, and I'm only touching into it and talking about some of the vital parts of it. Of course, we love talking to all of you about it and available at any time to help you with your endeavours. So today I'm going to describe what it is, its purpose and its benefits, and some tips around it. So let's begin with sales and operations planning is really an alignment of demand and supply to deliver meaningful results. It bridges strategic goals to the day-to-day operations and does all sorts of great things like optimizing the resourcing, boosting customer satisfaction through on-time deliveries and lead time reductions normally, strengthens financial performance, fosters cross-functional collaboration, and aligns operational plans with financial priorities. It also helps us to harness data that's available throughout the organization in different systems, and on the more cultural levels, helps to break down silos and get people to collaborate on behalf of the customers. So if I just for a minute could talk about just planning for a second. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend 4 hours sharpening the axe, is a phrase or saying attributed to Abraham Lincoln when he was a young boy. And I think it's very apt for sales and operations planning. The plan must be an enterprise-wide plan, well thought through. Lots of local plans or separate tasks are often very dangerous and will get you in trouble. Or the absence of planning is just pure firefighting. Some of you may know what that feels like, but the objective of sales and operations planning is to get us into a more proactive mode. I'd like to switch for a minute and just use an analogy if I could. So what have sales and operations planning and fitness got in common? Well, think about fitness or personal well-being, the balance of mental and physical well-being, and ability to perform your daily tasks. It includes nutrition, strength, conditioning, general fitness, and mindfulness, all that comes with that. And of course, most importantly, rest. But if I just talk about like at one end of the spectrum here on the left, that you might have one extreme, which is the couch potato. I'm sure we've none of those here. It's all super athletes that I'm talking to today. But at the other end of the spectrum are these super athletes. And there's a whole list of different stages in between. You might subscribe to one of those or might think of yourself as having done one of those in the past, or you may well be the super athlete as I've described. But really, organizations are no different. On the left, on one extreme, there are stagnant organizations. Maybe they don't need to change or don't want to change, and everything just does fine by just being repeated every day. And there's some industries, particularly where you're thinking of like railroads that need to run on time or whatever else, where they value just repeatability and don't want too much change. But most organizations in this era, including the railways, need to do some change in some aspects of what they do. At the other extreme is the transformative organization that seems to adapt and pivot very easily to change as it comes at it, whether it's a digitalization requirement or a sustainability requirement. They just seem to be on the front foot and thinking about those things before they happen. And then, of course, like the fitness timeline, there's everything in between. And most of us at some stage of our career, if not right now, will know that reactive stance that you end up just having to react to things rather than being able to recover. And we want to move more and towards that more planned, more transformative organization as much as possible. So that's an analogy I'd like you to hold, and we'll talk about it a little later. But I'm sure all of you have some attributes of an excellent organization. I'm talking about this most specific one that joins a lot of the parts together, called sales and operations planning, or in some organizations, it would be called integrated business planning. What we need to do for sales and operations planning is ensure that we have great demand and supply coordination, align strategic goals with the operational execution to make sure what's happening every day is getting us closer towards the annual plan or the annual objectives or the monthly budget. And we want to make sure that resources in the organization are optimized. I'd like to think of it as, to use the analogy again, it's like the cardiovascular system for the organization, but it's transporting information rather than blood throughout the system. And if that information is really good and flowing well, then the chances are the organization will be able to deliver. So, what are the objectives of sales and operations planning? Well, the first objective is really alignment across the organization. Now, most specifically, we're looking for really good alignment from sales, marketing, engineering, production, and sourcing. They're the key ones in the value stream that provides value for the customer. Of course, HR and finance and quality are all aligned as well, but these are the ones that we concentrate on to get the sales and operations planning right. The next key objective is to get the demand and supply balancing so that we're sure that the demand we're getting from our customers and the resources and supply of parts that we're putting in place all match very well with our forecasting and, most importantly, our business plan so that we can achieve the business plan. The third objective is really collaboration and communication, making sure that everybody understands what plan we're on, that we have good open dialogue and a consensus. And I don't really mean a democratic consensus as much as we're all working on the one plan. It's not equal votes for everybody here as much as we're thinking of if we're all on the same plan, we have much better chance of success. And of course, then the shared responsibility that we all know our roles and we share in trying to get the right result for the customer. The fourth one then is data-driven decisions. We want to make sure that we have a way of thinking about sales forecasts and sales demand that is consistent, that we're consistent in how we think about production capacity and getting it in place, and the inventory levels that are needed, and that we share that data in a way that allows everybody to tie all the pieces together. And then finally, the fifth objective, financial integration, to make sure that the resourcing allocation meets the budget requirements for the business and that we're checking and monitoring performance all the time to make sure that we're on track, or if we're not on track, that we take action to get back on track as soon as possible. The shorter the lag between when you monitor the performance and you take action, the closer you will be to meeting your objectives. So then, if I just talk about the benefits you can expect from sales and operations planning. So customer satisfaction is a very obvious one. With improved demand fulfillment, on-time delivery is very high, and customers can run their own organizations or what they need to do with the products very easily. Operation efficiently comes by that optimization and reduction of waste. Financial performance, probably a given from what I've been talking about earlier, but if we have this level of coordination, then we have probably optimized the resources and got a better financial performance. And of course, it puts the organization on a very good footing to be more agile and adaptable to all the changes that are coming at organizations these days. Another way of looking at it, equally important, the benefits come in this kind of virtuous cycle. If we create this very good common plan that's well shared throughout the organization, it really improves visibility, builds collaboration, enhances performance, and reduces risk. And that's what makes it very important. Now, just shifting focus a little bit, S&OP can drive predictability, standardization, and accountability. And really using that kind of timeline analogy from a stagnant organization to a transformative one, we can move from that reactive focus on processes to much more proactive. We're planning ahead, we're thinking ahead all the time. And that's what makes it much easier to live in an organization. It moves us from uncertainty into this really standardized way of operating by having very good understanding of what inputs are required, what outputs are required, and of course, everybody knowing their roles and responsibilities to take those inputs, do their tasks and provide the right inputs to the next person in the chain or to the customers. But sales and operations planning allows this to be done on a cross-functional basis throughout the organization. I want to talk about some of the challenges in implementing S&OP. First one is kind of cultural in nature. The breaking down the silos doesn't just happen without effort. And that means that leaders in an organization need to foster that collaboration and watch out for the right language and right discussions happening at the appropriate places in the organization. There may be a technology investment required. Hopefully it's only using the tools that you've already bought from Microsoft or wherever to coordinate your data, but it may be that the systems that you use for planning and organizing need to be upgraded a little bit. So there may be a technology investment, but all the time we're looking for some kind of support of our cardiovascular system of the organization, if you like, to make sure that it's able to give us the information we need to run the business. And then leadership commitment is very important. We'll talk about some of the meetings and reviews that are key to sales and operations planning, but leadership support to make sure those processes happen and that we don't do a lot of exceptions and crisis management outside of those. Leadership can unwittingly be undermining a core process by expediting things on behalf of certain customers or certain things and undermining the process that we're trying to put in place. So we just need to watch out for those things.
Gene, I might just step in there if you don't mind on that slide. When we were putting this material together, it came through quite a lot that there's, I suppose, an overlap between the systems that people use in their organization, and Gene will touch on this in a little more detail, but the software systems, the ERPs and the CRMs, right, which house our data. But what we're talking about here is a system of work more so than, or a system of management rather than an actual software package, because we get asked very often, what is the system that can do this for me? And there is no silver bullet. And I know a lot of people on the call here with us today will know that feeling, right? When you're going out looking for what is the thing that can solve my problems for me, it's not as easy as that, right? As we all know. Back to what Gene mentioned about the really getting into the planning. This is about the system of planning and organizing the inputs so that we can understand that cross collaboration across the business and organizing the work that needs to be done. It can be done using more simple tools. It can be done using Excel. Depends on where your data is. Some data is housed in better places than others, or in better shape than others. But it's really about what is the data or the inputs that we need to actually drive this meeting and coordination of the work that needs to be done. So just a clarification, it's not a software system that we're talking about here, more so the system of work and system of management.
So to that note, when we think of S&OP, we think very much of this box that ties the order to fulfillment process on the right. That's the process by which customers can place an order with us. We confirm that. We then hopefully ship something to them or provide a service to them and invoice them, and they pay us. There's another process that mirrors that on the other side, on the left, which is the procure to pay process. We place an order with our suppliers. They provide us with goods or material, and then we receive an invoice from them and hopefully pay them. And then in the middle, there's our production and our financial processes that tie all of that together, the money and the materials flowing from left to right and the money flowing from right to left. But the S&OP is the coordinating business processes, as Mark said, and then in the background is the ERP data to support that. As Mark said, that could be anything from simple Excel or maybe the back of a cigarette box in the old days, all the way through to the very sophisticated systems. It's very important that you make sure that the business processes that you need are clear and that the system supports that, not the other way around. We've come across far too many situations where people are trying to feed the monster that is their ERP rather than taming the monster to do what they need to run their business. Anyway, to move on then, how to run S&OP. Well, there are 4 key steps in an S&OP cycle, and these need to be run. We set it up around reviews when we're talking to our clients. And these reviews are, first of all, step 1 is a demand review, which really looks at what our customers' needs are now and in the future. And some of it is predicting, some of it is stuff we know because they've already placed those orders. It's followed by a supply review that is, what's our response? If that's the customer demand, exactly how are we going to organize ourselves to deliver that, how they want it, when they want it. And then steps 3 and 4 are the pre-S&OP review itself and an executive S&OP review. They are similar, and in smaller organizations, they can be merged. But the pre-S&OP meeting is the demand and supply parts of the organization getting together and figuring out any gaps that they may have versus the business plan and versus that demand plan, and making sure that we have good tactics to react to those gaps and eliminate the gaps as much as possible. And then the pre-S&OP meeting is very much signing that off with all of the people involved with operations. And then the S&OP itself is bringing that to executive, usually CFO, a CEO, for sign off. They're very important. I call them rituals or of the organization, and the discipline of doing those is very important. I'm just going to go through what one of those might entail. So think of this as a meeting, and we'll talk about it on the next slide when it might happen. But think of it as a meeting where the inputs to that meeting, and it may not be all of these inputs, maybe some of them, but this is just a useful list to think about. What were historical sales? Are there any seasonal variances we need to take into account this year? Does Easter move, and does it mean we have to take different holidays, or there'll be different demand in the marketplace? What are the market trends? What do we know about the different customers' demands? Do they have a lot of inventory on hand so they won't be ordering next month? Things like that. From the engineering, new product development and marketing people, we'd like to know about products coming to end of life, or new products being introduced, or changes to products, or maybe even any promotional plans that might be affecting the demand that's coming at us in the coming months. Of course, we need to bring in the revenue forecast and the budget, and it's prudent to bring in the demand KPIs from the previous S&OP. You know, last month we had a forecast for, say, well, January is just finishing now. We had a forecast for January. How well did the customers actually fulfill the orders against that forecast, and how well did we fulfill the demand? And any actions that were taken at last month's demand review, we'd like those to be reviewed here to make sure that the actions we took were, first of all, done and were successful. The outputs from the demand review would be a consensus demand plan. And again, I'll stress, it's not a democratic demand plan as much as a consensus. It's agreed there's one plan that goes forward to the rest of the organization. That we record the gaps in that demand plan versus the business plan. And usually the actions to close those gaps would be with the business development people, with marketing, sales, and maybe account management from time to time. So the other 3 reviews would have similar inputs and outputs that will be in the slide decks you'll receive from us later. But just in the interest of time and not boring you to death, I'm not going to go through each of them here, because it's a similar list in many ways. Just want to move on then to those S&OP reviews should happen to a monthly calendar. Now, I want to stress before I start that we're not planning the month within the month. We should be planning out 2 and 3 months. We'll come to that at a later part of the discussion. But I've set this up as a calendar for the month. Just assume a month of about 20 days, and maybe on the 5th day of the month, we would do the demand review. Then the consensus demand review would be published, and the operations people that plan production and the procurement or supply chain people that plan all of the materials that we require would then go about their business, culminating in a supply review around day 9. They then figure out the gaps and what needs to be done about it, and present to the pre-S&OP meeting that would happen around the 12th of the month. And then when they get some direction from an ops director or similar, then they work on that a little bit, and that's presented as the final recommended plan for the coming 3 or 4 months to the executive S&OP meeting. As I said earlier, probably CEO and CFO, and maybe 1 or 2 other of the executive team, if not all of it. The people that make up the S&OP team. First of all, I'll talk about the S&OP coordinator. Probably a very, very important role in this. It does not need to be the most senior person that's involved in the S&OP, but they do need to be an incredibly organized person that has enough time and bandwidth to follow up on the actions and set up all the meetings and record the notes and actions. They generally need to be well respected throughout the organization, and have the backing and the trust of the organization. Probably no harm to be reasonably likable as well, because they're influencing an awful lot of people, and it makes it a lot easier to do that job. So very important person in the organization. Then supported, and remember, the others can be more senior to them, but for the purposes of S&OP, they're like the person in command of the ship at the time. They're on the bridge, controlling what goes on with all of the inputs from their seniors, peers, and their juniors to make all of this happen. They're supported by the commercial and marketing people who, as I mentioned earlier, do their demand reviews or their sales reviews, and then give predictions of what the demand is going to be. And we would be measuring the accuracy of their predictions, because that has a huge impact on the predictability of the operations. They're also supported by the R&D or engineering people. As I said earlier, if there are any changes to products or features in products, they may have to be factored in at this stage. Then we move to the right of that diagram there, where we have the supply chain people and procurement people. In smaller organizations, that's one and the same. In larger organizations, they're quite different. And the supply chain people would be responsible for intercompany demands and pieces like that, and schedules that would come from group headquarters. And then the procurement people are focused on getting the materials and dealing with the suppliers, sourcing and procurement. And then, of course, we have production planning and execution, who are involved in the production planning, as it says, scheduling of lines and resources and machines to make it all happen. Finance provide a role here in terms of analytics and making sure that all of the plans are meeting the financial objectives. So a very important role in all of this. But just go back to the well-being or the fitness analogy for a minute, just to help with this next idea in sales and operations planning. So your well-being, so it's not really a destination, it's an ongoing journey of mindful planning and intentional actions. And I think they're very important words that transfer into the sales and operations planning. Mindful planning and intentional actions to make it all happen. So I've just shown you here this kind of time horizon that hour by hour, day by day, we're executing. And that could be by hour, we're checking, by shift, by day, by week. So that's execution and short-term planning of that execution. We also have near-term planning that we'll discuss at length in a minute, because the near-term planning is really where the heavy lifting of S&OP is done. And then at a higher level, you have the tactical planning, which is that kind of annual planning. What are our objectives for the year and how are we doing those? And the more strategic planning, maybe the 3-year planning for the business. So I want you to think of those planning horizons. And just for a minute, we'll go back to the wellness analogy. And some of you may well have a life coach or may be well on track with all of this, so you'll know what I'm talking about. But you have aspirations in your own life, your life plan, what you want to be, what education you aspire to, and what you aspire to in your life. So who knows what you might have in those. And then there's life balance and alignment that you need to make sure you're getting all of that in good balance, so that, you know, everything's working out well for you. And the components that support that, look, I've just taken 4 of them as an example here. The fitness planning, you know, a gym membership so that you can get fit. And then in the near term, well, you need a gym plan with what routines you're going to do or what exercises in the gym. not that I'm a great member of any gym, then you have to do a productive workout. And that's the whole fitness regime. And if you think mindfully about those different things and each workout is productive, then you will be fulfilling the gym plan, and the gym membership will be paying for itself, and you'll be fit and healthy, hopefully. I could add nutrition to that, and there's certain things you would need to do to make sure that you're optimizing your nutrition. We could also add mental health to that and what you might have to do short term, medium term, long term, and maybe things you'd need to do in your relationships or whatever. But if I could just take that analogy to just explain the different time horizons and bring it into the organization for a minute, then we have all of these, sorry, I should have mentioned, and the customers of that are both yourself, your partner, your family, your friends, and hopefully everybody's benefiting from how you're going about your life. So translate that into the organization, and we have the same planning horizons. Now we have all these different areas being planned. We have the sourcing of material, the operations or the production to put things together, the delivery and the planning of inventories. We may have to stage inventory. And then we have that whole demand planning and interaction with customers. There may be vendor managed inventory or warehouse or distribution to be done, planned in at forward locations, all serving the customer. And it's very important that we're able to tie all of those together and that they all make sense and interact with each other. I mentioned earlier the time horizon, and I put particular focus on the 4 month. I think 12 weeks to 16 weeks or thereabouts, or 3 months out. So if we're in the end of January now, an organization that's planning ahead has February well sorted out, and it's thinking about March and April right now, and how they cover things for there. The S&OP, I believe, should focus on the near-term operational planning, that 4 month area. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If we need any extra resources or retraining of resources or whatever, then we have some time to do those in the next 2 or 3 months before we have to act on it. If we were having to do that right now on the 29th of January for February, that puts us into a reactive mode. So if we're concentrating on that longer lead time, it helps us with resources and equipment allocation, but it also helps us with the procurement of the materials we'd need. Most things that we'd need, their lead times would fit in within that 3 months or 4 months. Some of you will have long lead time items, and there's risk purchases to be discussed with those. S&OP is the perfect place to be identifying those and making those risk decisions. The near-term operational plan is deeply connected with the operational planning and the execution. It informs those shorter-term plans about what needs to be done, and it relies on the performance information coming from those to put together the operational plans. And the near-term operational plan is also informed by the strategic plan and the technical plan. It needs to be getting new factories, new lines, new equipment in place so that we can deliver the operational plans, and maybe extra people if required. So then a couple of vital points that I'd like to just put a little bit of focus on. Communications. I'd often find that there's a very different language spoken in the business development end of the house. They're talking about part numbers and pack numbers or whatever that the customer refers to. But then when you get into the production side of things, they're talking about kilograms processed or how many hours machines were running for, and they're talking a different language. We need to make sure that we understand each other's language, or that there's good translation. And when I come across new organizations, I often marvel about how different people would talk about, say, a piece of production equipment or a production line. They might have 3 or 4 different names for it, and they don't realize they're using different language to describe the same thing. That's difficult for new people in the organization and people to get a grasp on it. So be very mindful of the language that's used to describe the what's being done up and down the organization. And I can't stress enough the need for really internal communications, how everybody understands what the plan is, what the what's going on in the plan at the moment. and then moving on to exceptions. Whenever exceptions happen, there's a breakdown, there's a storm, and things happen, electricity's out or water's out or whatever. Like, the people that are responsible for that need to understand what they need to do about it, most importantly, but how they communicate the implications of that and the recovery as a result of that into the S&OP plan, because it will definitely have knock-on effects to everybody that are trying to achieve their objectives in the S&OP plan. I'd like to just also describe governance. The oversight of the S&OP plan is very important. Everybody's roles and responsibilities within it, and that they have the right capabilities to do what they need to do. That it is, the performance of it is very transparent to everybody as frequently as possible, in real time, hopefully, and that we're giving good feedback so that we can get the performance back on track if it is deviating from track, and that we learn from things that go wrong in previous periods, that there are consequences that we learn from and make the process better all the time. The learning organization is a phrase used by the author of a book, The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, and it describes how really good organizations think about the models they use, like S&OP, to think about how the whole organization is joined together. He refers to that as a mental model, and he puts huge emphasis on people having personal mastery of their roles within that and understanding of them, and then being able to give and take the feedback and act on the feedback. Those are really good learning organizations that learn how to be better, and that puts them on the right side of that and continuum I was talking about. So I suppose that covers the major points I wanted to talk about today, and hopefully all of you have a lot of this in place already. Maybe you just haven't named it S&OP, but you're doing it. But if we tie all of those bits together really well in a really synchronized fashion through an S&OP, then we get great customer results and great customer experiences. And that's how S&OP can help you. So I suppose, Mark, I'll just hand it back to you there for any of the questions that you might have there, or people want to ask at this stage.
Yeah, I suppose at this point, and thanks very much, Gene. I'd ask people just again to use the chat if you'd like to ask questions of Gene or myself. Now, more so Gene on this, the expert in this topic. But I suppose just from my own point of view, a bit of context. We were talking about S&OP internally and decided to put on this webinar because we were hearing a lot of noise from customers and pain points coming up around this area. And as Gene pointed to, it wasn't coming up and it wasn't called S&OP, right? The pain points were the communication issues, the alignment across the business, that clash that everybody has, or we hear a lot of between, production and sales, and making sure we meet our demand and our supply internally. And it was something we were putting together, the webinar, that we wanted to bring people to the table and really share some of that knowledge that we had, right? So as we said, some people will have more exposure to this or be more or further along this line, the squiggle that Gene has on the screen at the moment, in making sense of all the chaos, as we call it. But we've gone through, I suppose, an introduction to the topic itself, the benefits, the how-to. But when we were having the discussion, putting the webinar together, I was really asking Gene, where would I start if I had my organization? I was really wanted to put shape or sense on this, start to get my data together, start to put it together. But is there anything else that you really need to follow or take with you? So, Gene, you had an interesting note on I suppose, how to approach this from your point of view or from the experience you've had in doing this with other organizations. I thought might be worth sharing.
Yes, it's an interesting question. Now, on the other side of that question, I also had on the back of my mind, say my broadband failed in the middle of the webinar, what would happen next? A small bit of planning. And Mark and I were thinking, well, I'll share the slides with him and he'd be able to share them, and would he be able to talk to them? And I was saying to him, actually, when it all boils down, there's absolutely no rocket science in S&OP. Yes, there's a lot in it. And yes, it's complicated when you see it all there, and you have to think it through. And there are hard yards to fight to get it all into a very consistent fashion. But there's one thing above all else that's required for S&OP. It's conviction. It's to have the conviction to see it through to completion and not get distracted by the here and now and all the noise that comes in and the emergencies and all the other things that are going on. And I think that above all else is what sets organizations apart, is they have the conviction, or some of you may have heard me use the word relentlessness, to see it through in a very disciplined, formalized fashion so that it is explicit to everybody in the organization and it does what it's meant to do. And interestingly, as you put the components in place, the different parts of the planning, and start tying them together, each of the components itself will uncover all sorts of opportunities to improve by a little bit. So getting the data cleansed and the data accurate, getting the things joined up, getting the language consistent, just getting all of those things that we talked about are necessary inputs, say, to the demand review I talked about earlier. Having those in a formal way that everybody in the organization can see it is great communication across the organization. So all of those things help. But the one word is having the conviction to put them in place in a good way that they're available to everybody, and then living the system month on month is by far the most important thing of all.